Hello, sir, you're right.
Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning and welcome to the virtual meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Rob Kendrick and I'm the chairman of the committee. Welcome to all members and officers in attendance today. The audio feed of this meeting is being broadcast via the County Council's website, and I'd also like to welcome members of the press and public who are listening to our meeting online today. Can I just remind you that anyone invited to speak during today's meeting should unmute their microphone and switch on their camera. Please do turn off your camera and microphone when not participating. If you wish to speak, please use the chat function and type "speak" as a comment. All officers and members are welcome to use the chat function, and requests to speak will be collated by my Vice Chairman, Councillor Alexander Morn. The Senior Scrutiny Officer will indicate in the chat when a new item has begun on the agenda. Now, we do have a very heavy agenda today, so can you please keep your questions and contributions as succinct and as concise as possible. If you experience any IT issues during the meeting, please end the call using the red phone icon and rejoin the meeting using the link previously provided. If you do experience connectivity issues while speaking, please turn your camera off as this may help. If you continue to experience IT issues, please contact Simon Firth, IT engineer, for assistance. Can I also ask that members who are intending to leave the meeting or who are returning to the meeting, that they indicate using the chat function. Officers do not need to do so. Can I please ask Trina Coates, Senior Democratic Services Officer, to confirm the presence of all members and officers in attendance in the meeting. Over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I couldn't get my microphone to work then earlier, so I do apologise. Right, thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. Could I please ask you to confirm your presence when your name is called? Councillor Rob Kendrick.
Present.
Councillor Alexander Morn.
Present.
Councillor Matt Bowles.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Wendy Bowkett.
Present.
Councillor Rob Fuchs.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Julie Killey. Councillor Mrs. Julie Killey.
I saw her before, Katrina. But
yeah, maybe... I did. Maybe she's lost. Right. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Colin Matthews.
Present.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Wotton.
Present.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
Present.
Mrs. Megan Machin.
Present.
Megan, thank you. Miss Alex Sayer.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Patricia Bradwell.
Present.
Thank you. And is Councillor David Brailsford there yet?
Yes, present, Katrina.
Thank you. Can I just go back and see if Councillor Mrs. Julie Killey's come in or has managed? Is that a yes? Yeah. Thank you. We also have the following officers present here today. We have Heather Sandy, Executive Director for Children's Services, Jill Chandonair, Inclusion and Attendance Manager, Sheridan Dodsworth, Head of Special Educational Needs and Disability, Charlotte Gray, Acting Head of Service, Children's Strategic Commissioning, Sarah Gregory, Interim Commissioning Manager, Commercial, Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, Eileen McMurray, Programme Manager, Children's SEND, Dave Pennington, Head of Property Development, Mark Popwell, Head of Finance, Children's Services, and Martin Smith, Executive Director of Education.
Has anyone who's participating in the meeting today not had their name read out by Trina? No?
I think I might have missed it, Chairman. Councillor Fido, I was on a call with a client. I do beg your pardon. I was just trying to get on.
Okay.
I do apologise, Councillor Fido. Yes, I've missed you off. I do apologise.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that, Councillor Fido. Now for the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Trina, do we have any apologies?
Hello, Chairman. Yes, we've received an apology from the Reverend Philip Johnson today.
Thank you very much. And second item is declarations of councillors' interests. If any member would like to declare an interest, can you please indicate in the chat function now by typing speed? Councillor Morn, do we have any members who'd like to declare an interest?
We do, Chairman. Councillor Whittington.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Whittington.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just need to declare my standard interest that my son is in receipt of the services from the Leonardo service. This will be the last time I have to make it because he's 25 in February for our next meeting. But so thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whittington. So we now move on to the minutes of the meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee, which was held on the 20th of November last year. This item is to confirm and sign the minutes from the last meeting of the committee on the 20th of November 2020 as a correct record. Do I have a proposer and seconder on the minutes, please?
I'll propose Roberts. Councillor Fowkes.
Thank you, Councillor Fowkes.
I'll second, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We will now vote on the minutes, and you're voting on whether you agree that the minutes are a correct record. Trina Cope will call out the name of each member present in alphabetical order, and you're asked to state for, against, or abstain. So again, it's over to you, Trina.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So Councillor Kendrick,
For,
Councillor Alexander Morn,
For.
Councillor Matt Bowles,
For.
Councillor Mrs. Wendy Bowkett,
For.
Councillor Matthew Fido,
Forgot to vote then. I didn't know what I was voting for.
Councillor Rob Fuchs,
For.
Councillor Mrs. Julie Kelly, Councillor Colin Matthews,
For.
Councillor Mark Whittington,
For.
Councillor Linda Wotton,
For.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
For.
Thank you. Mrs. Megan Machin,
For.
Alex Sayer.
Abstain.
Yes. Can I just go back? Is Councillor Kelly there? So from those that have voted, the minutes are carried, Chairman.
thank you very much, Trina. And I've just had a note that Janice Spencer has also in attendance at the meeting. I'm not sure if her name was mentioned at the beginning, Trina, but I see she's indicated she's here, which is great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Trina. Item 4 on the agenda is announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services and the Chief Officers. I just have one announcement to make, and that is to remind members and officers today that the current meeting appointment is for items 1 to 10 on the agenda. At the end of item 10, we will need to leave this appointment and join the separate appointment for item 11. I'm planning to have a 5-minute comfort break at the end of item 8 to ensure that the external link is no longer live before we consider items 9, 10 and 11, which are exempt items. I then plan to have another 5-minute comfort break at the end of item 10 to allow us to switch between two appointments at 12:30 p.m. I appreciate this is rather complex. We've not done this one before, but I'm sure with operation it'll go fine. So can we move on to Executive Councillor announcements now? Are there any Executive Councillor announcements from Councillor Patricia Bradwell, Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services?
Well, I just wanted to just say something about schools, Mr. Chairman. Obviously,
Thank you.
there's been a lot in the media about schools and school meals and that. So just to say that, yes, our schools opened, although it was a little bit traumatic for them because one minute they were opening and then the next minute they weren't opening. They were opening for vulnerable children and key worker children on the Tuesday. But schools did open. There does appear in some schools to be more children than there were in the first lockdown. I actually think parents probably now think, they're quite happy. They feel their children are safe in school. So, yes, we've got more children in. With regards school meals, in the main, our children, they either have a cooked meal. The children who are probably not attending school, who are vulnerable, schools in Lincolnshire, earlier on, in December, we said it was up to schools how they provided the free school meals. Some, I think we offered them, they could do hampers or vouchers, but I know, a lot of schools will be giving vouchers now to families. We don't use Chartwell in Lincolnshire, and I did hear yesterday there was another company who weren't doing a very good job for school meals for us in some parts of the country. So just wanted to assure members that in the main, our children who are in school will be getting that hot meal. And I do know some schools, couple in Lincoln, they go out and deliver meals to families as well. So I think schools are really doing, all they can at this very difficult time, really. And I know Heather would agree with me as well. All our services have gone back into a lockdown way of working, social care, everything seems to be working okay. But I just wanted to mention that bit about schools and the free school meal bit, really, because there has been a lot of media, and I just wanted to assure members our children are getting looked after very well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Spraggle. That's very helpful of you, and it's good news that things are working as best as they can in the current circumstances. Are there any Chief Officer announcements from Heather Sandy, Executive Director for Children's Services?
Thank you, Chairman. I haven't got any announcements. Can I just support somebody sharing their screen, which means that'll be on the recording? I'm not sure who it is. It might be Councillor Bulkett, I think, if you click on the cross.
My screen went all funny. I thought I'd just taken it off. It just came up. I'm having real problems with this Microsoft. Do you think I should go out and come back in the meeting?
Councillor Bulkett, do you see where your arrow's on Councillor Bradwell at the moment?
Yeah.
If you take it up to where you would normally press your mute, and then to the button next to your mute with a cross on it.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That one.
Sorry, it's easily done. From nowhere.
Easily done. So no, Chairman, no announcements from me, but thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm glad we've got that IT glitch sorted. Right, if we can move on to item 5, which is the council budget 2021 to 22. This report advises the committee of the 2021-22 budget implications for the council's children's services activities. The committee's comments will be passed on to the executive for consideration at its meeting on the 2nd of February. And I would like to invite Heather Sandy, Executive Director for Children's Services, to present the report. We also have Mark Popperwell, Head of Finance, Children's Services, in attendance to help answer any questions. Let's go over to you, Heather.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So as you say, this report outlines the Council's budget proposals for the next financial year, 2021-22, and it specifically looks at the budget implications for the Council's Children's Services activity. So this is the opportunity for members of Children's Committee to scrutinise those proposals and make any comments prior to the executive meeting. The executive is currently consulting on a single-year financial plan for revenue and capital budgets, which is reflective of the fact that we've had a one-year only spending review by central government. The budget proposals are based on an assumed increase in council tax of 1.99% in 21-22. The report highlights that the council continues to face future financial challenges, added with the growing cost pressures from the demand-led services such as ourselves and adult social care, and inflationary pressures on our contracted services. At this point in time, the medium-term financial plan shows that we can achieve a balanced budget in 2021-22, but that currently in each of the following 2 years we'll have a budget shortfall which will need to be supported by reserves to achieve a balanced budget. As you're all very well aware, the coronavirus pandemic's impacted significantly on the 2021 financial year, as well as all other things in the year, and central government's provided grant funding to cover our costs and losses that have have arisen during the pandemic. What we've done is we've assumed that where those direct impacts continue, those will continue to be funded by the government grant, and we've had an indication that this is the case. I'd like to emphasise to the committee that in preparation for the proposals that are before you today, managers in children's services had the opportunity to go through all of our budgets in detail to identify where we felt there were cost pressures and where we felt we could put some savings forward. And I'd like to assure the committee that the proposals before you ensure that there are no negative impacts on children's services activity. For the purposes of this report, children's services activity is presented through two headings, education and children's social care. But we've broken down in each section which elements that's referring to, because obviously you'll be more familiar with more of the granular detail underneath those headings. So coming first to education in section 1.9, you can see those main service headings with their budgets in detail, and the proposed cost pressure in this area is just over 5 million, and that relates to the home to school transport budget. We did identify some modest savings in this area, so they've all been rounded off together. The most significant factor, as I've said, is the home to school transport. It's a really challenging and volatile budget. It's affected by unfavourable economic conditions, changes in legislation which then have to be applied, increased demand for specialist transport due to the increasing complexity of some young people and their physical equipment that needs to be with them. And we've also got the challenges we've always had around Lincolnshire being a very large, very, very rural county, and that impacts on our budget. So this budget does remain a financial risk to the council, and our services are working really hard with the Transport Services Group to take all steps we can to achieve efficiencies and manage the pressures wherever possible. But we have had to put forward these cost pressures, which the executive have included in the proposals. Just to break them down a bit, we've got 2 million of the budget is to rebase our budget to the levels that we saw in the 1920 financial year. That's due to contract inflation within mainstream transport and an increase in transport for special educational needs pupils, including more specialised transport, as I've alluded to, and some loan transport. It also includes £1 million cost for special school transport, specifically to our special schools, and that's the one single operator model. And we're currently reviewing that model to look at what we can do to support it going forward, because it is seeing cost rises. There is a £600,000 cost pressure for the public service vehicle accessibility regulations, PSVAR they're called. And this is the requirement now placed upon us that vehicles we use need to be wheelchair accessible. And so that's requiring adaptations and upgrades to some of the vehicles that we use, and that's passported through to us in rises. There are other pressures within there, the normal inflationary rises in the delivery of transport, an increase in the number of mainstream pupils who are eligible, and a growth in the national living wage for the drivers, for example. So they're the main points under the education budget pressures. Moving on to children's social care in section 1.14. Again, you'll see the main service headings and the budgets are detailed there. There's proposed cost pressures again in this area of just over £2.5 million, and these are mostly related to children in care services. We've got a £2 million cost pressure, which is to rebase our budget to the spending levels we were seeing before COVID. Contributing factors to that is an increase in the number of children in care, a shift in placement composition from internal foster care arrangements to some more external foster care placements. As we're seeing our ageing foster care and community retire, we are working really hard to recruit, and we're recruiting better than other areas, but it's still an area of challenge for us. Again, to reassure the committee, we're working to address that and hoping to use some of the consequences of the pandemic to promote foster caring as a really rich alternative for people to get involved in. We've also seen an increase in our specialist placements, which incur significantly greater unit cost, and some market forces within the external looked after children's sector. So when we're placing with private providers, we're seeing that there are more children than there are places, so that your providers are starting to be able to increase their prices. And that's something we're raising nationally as an issue, because as we've said many times here, we don't believe it's right that private providers can profit off vulnerable children needing placements. So that's something we'll continue to champion nationally. As the paper outlines, we're taking steps to mitigate and manage escalation of needs, and we've got lots of work underway through our transformation programme in children in care. And more detail on that programme, of course, will come to Children's Scrutiny Committee to scrutinise as the time is right. Just to again reassure the committee, our children in care numbers at the last measurement were around 46 per 10,000, which compares nationally to 65 per 10,000. So whilst we are seeing increases, we are still well below our national and regional benchmarks, and our unit costs still offer value for money, and that continues to be strong in Lincolnshire. In terms of the pandemic, we have seen an increase in children in care as a result of the pandemic and increased costs associated to that. Currently, that's allocated within the local authority COVID grant, and those costs are, they're at around 15 million, and we're working corporately to look at what it looks like next year and how we manage those costs going forward. So also included in there is an inflationary growth for placement costs. So that's to do with our internal foster carers who, as I've said, are highly valued, offer great outcomes for children and great value for money. They're seeing a 2% increase in their weekly allowances from April 2021 in these proposals, and also a proposed cost pressure related to special guardianship orders. Special guardianship orders continue to be seen by the courts and by ourselves as an important option for permanent placement for children. So we may continue to see a rise in that area, and that will come through in subsequent budget proposals. So moving on then to section 1.25 in the capital programme. You can see the capital programme is a 10-year programme which is being compiled, and as I say, section 1.25 details the overall gross and net capital programme, with section 1.26 detailing the different types of schemes. For Lincolnshire schools, we manage and maintain an annual capital programme of individual school condition and maintenance projects, which is overseen by the Children's Services Capital Programme Board. The service continues to receive all capital funding that's made available by the DFE so that we can manage critical priority issues. Our allocation of basic need grant, which supports us to provide school places, is 2.9 million this year. That's significantly lower than prior years, but it will still allow us to provide sufficient places for the children of Lincolnshire. Estimated school condition and devolved capitals are at 3.5 million and 1 million respectively, and that's outlined in the paper. So I want to come on now to our Building Communities of Specialist Provision strategy. That's the planned capital spending commitment linked to our programme for special schools. Members of this committee are very well sided on that strategy, designed to deliver an increase in special school places across the whole of Lincolnshire so that children and young people with SEND can have their education, health and care needs met in their local community. This is a really exciting project, but what you've seen historically in the committee is as we're bringing the schemes forward, there have been some increases on those individual schemes. Because this is one of the biggest capital schemes the council's embarked on, those increases are cumulative, and we've seen the cost of the whole life cost of the programme rise to 86 million from 56 million based on the actual scheme's costs. Now, there's lots of reasons for that increased budget. You'll remember, for example, the Department for Education declined our bid for a free school in Lincoln. So we've had to add that to the programme, which was a cost of around 12 million. There's been some individual design solutions to ensure that we address travel and traffic concerns where we're doing expansions. And also we've seen some poor site conditions when we've got on to do the expansion works that have needed to be addressed before we can continue. In addition to all of that, we've also seen the COVID impact, which I know all of the construction industry is reflecting on. There's a lot more detail on that in Appendix A, and I can take questions on that in a moment. I'll just continue to run through the paper. But I am delighted to say that additional funding has been secured to deliver the revised programme. That funding's been secured from government grants, from LCC capital grants and from a reallocation proposed in this budget from the new schools requirements, which means that we are able to continue with the programme, which still offers excellent value for money and excellent outcomes for children and young people. So really delighted we're able to meet those costs. Children's Services has also got capital funding earmarked within the capital programme for the creation of 2 smaller children's homes. This is another exciting development that I hope the committee will be delighted to receive papers on in the future. It's part of our transformation for children in care, making sure that we get the right care and the right help at the right time and for the right duration. It's about making sure we meet the needs of children in care in Lincolnshire as far as possible. The vision is to create a capacity within our residential estate to provide high quality therapeutic placements in-house, so that these placements will allow for children to have their needs met. It will be the younger children, and then to be able to step down into a foster caring family and to continue their childhood within a family setting. 2 new homes have been earmarked from the funding, which is part of the 10-year capital development programme. It's a really exciting programme, and I look forward to bringing more details for scrutiny as we move forward. So moving on to the schools budget. The schools budget is funded via the dedicated schools grant. And in 2021-22, you'll see it continues to comprise of those 4 blocks that we're getting used to: the schools block, the central school services block, the high needs block, and the early years block. Each of the 4 blocks from the DSG is determined by a separate national funding formula. Mark's going to take you through some of the schools funding issues in the next paper, but I'm just going to take you through the proposals within here. So we've got an indicative allocation for next year of 646 million, and that will be used to support all schools in Lincolnshire. That includes local authority schools and academies. You'll remember that the government implemented a new national funding formula in 2018-19, and that was to ensure a fair settlement for each of the mainstream schools. We as a council agreed to adopt that because it was a real improved financial settlement for Lincolnshire schools. And as I say, Mark's going to talk through any challenges we've got with that going forward. The area of high needs continues to cause us challenges as a local authority. All local authorities received an 8% increase, but actually that still remains an area of challenge for us financially. We're in a better place than most local authorities, but it's an area we need to consider to continue to work on. There are a number of budgets within the high needs block that are large and demand led and can be difficult to estimate, such as SEND budgets, education, healthcare, plan for mainstream, special school placements, a whole range of things that are demand led and we need to meet. And there continues to be a growing trend nationally with more young people requiring specialist support, and we're seeing that in Lincolnshire, which creates a financial impact. It remains a financial risk, particularly at a time of increasing demands. So what we've done is we've embarked on a transformational work programme, working with schools, with health partners, with parents across Lincolnshire to support children and young people with SEND. We're looking at securing better outcomes for young people through an integrated approach that will secure an offer in Lincolnshire that is financially sustainable under its central government funding allocation. And again, that's another area I look forward to focusing on with this committee in the next financial year as we begin to bring proposals forward for you to scrutinise. So in conclusion, Chair, members of the committee are asked to consider the report, to provide comments, which will be considered at the executive meeting on the 2nd of February. A long paper and complicated. I hope I've summarised it well enough for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. Indeed, a very comprehensive report and some very useful information for members of the committee. And now I would like to invite members of the committee to comment on this report. Councillor Morn, do we have any speakers?
Yes, we do, Chairman. We've got Councillor Mark Whittington and Councillor Robert Folkes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whittington, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't risk my camera if that's okay. My internet is a bit unstable here. I just want to thank Heather for a very, very good and comprehensive presentation of the report, and also to Mark and his rest of his education finance team for pulling it all together. I probably won't have much more to say because obviously as the finance exec support councillor to the leader who's the portfolio holder, I've been sort of in the loop regarding some of these. But just really to sort of thank Heather and her team, and Mark and his team for being able in a difficult situation, because there are some quite significant cost pressures in there. As Heather's already mentioned, especially home to school transport in particular, and I just want to but they've responded to the challenge. They found the cost as well as the cost pressures. They've been able to find savings as well. So it's a very, very good and comprehensive report. So many thanks to everybody concerned. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Whitton, and I'd certainly echo your comments as regards the excellent team that we have here. We're very fortunate, I think. Councillor Folkes, please, your comments.
Thanks, Rob. I'd like to echo Mark's comments. Well done, Heather, and your team. Thoroughly professional as always. Really good report. The only comment I have really is about the home to school transport, which is horrific. I mean, it's gone up 5 and a bit million, £32 million. I mean, not long ago, it was down at 24, and before that, lower than that. It's growing like Japanese knotweed. It really is awful. And the thing is, the government have very ambitious aspirations for this new green thing, getting rid of petrol-powered cars and whatnot, fairly soon. And this is going to obviously increase costs massively. So have Children's Services, have you ever done any sort of look into the future here to see the effect of this green aspiration the government has on the home to school transport budget? Because it seems that eventually our council tax is going to be, covering nothing else but home to school transport. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Folkes. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that obviously you're aware that a lot of our home to school transport piggybacks on the back of the public transport network. And I know that the Transport Services Group, who commission the transport, are well sided on the requirements in terms of the green agenda and in terms of looking at what that might mean going forward. I agree with you. This is an area of growth that, despite all the efforts that we put in, is really difficult for us to manage. It's, as I've cited in the paper, there are significant challenges across the board with this one. To reassure you, we are doing a root and branch review just to assure ourselves that there is nothing else we can do, that we couldn't manage it in a different way, that we couldn't look at it in a different way. And we're looking at working with some technical experts in the field to get them to come and do a bit of challenge with us as well. So it is an area we continue to review. We are cited on the green agenda. And the impact that may have, and actually sometimes, there's lots of developments that are incredibly good for our communities, such as the PSVAR. It is the right thing that our vehicles are wheelchair accessible. But when you run the number of vehicles we run, and you run the number of vehicles that are dedicated to school transport that we run, that means a lot of the cost falls on us. Whereas if you're in a city and your home to school transport relies on the public network, that falls under the public network. So it is a real challenge, yeah, and that is something that we continue to look at.
Great, thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you. Alexander, do we have any more speakers?
Chairman, I have got a few comments myself and questions, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start with what I think is a really good news story, if you like. On page 19, the SITFA benchmarking for LAC placements, which shows that Lincolnshire, while still delivering what's deemed an outstanding service, we're way below the sort of average costs for looked after children placements. And I think that certainly should be highlighted in the minutes, that is exceptional value for money, because we know that even though it's lower costs, we're still delivering the highest level of services for our young people. So that's really good to see that those costs are being managed effectively. Just following on from Councillor Folkes with home to school transport, it is a worry. And I just, if you look at that trajectory year on year, it's bloating increases, and particularly, the £2 million increase in the base budget for home to school transport, despite our efforts to encourage more people to walk to school and cycle and all of that. So that is a worry. And I just wonder, with this root and branch review you've mentioned, Heather, have we looked at perhaps insourcing more of the home to school transport delivery? Is that an option that's being looked at, which would give us potentially greater control over costs? I don't know. Perhaps that's something that has been looked at. So that's my sort of second comment. And also, I do want to mention the increase in investment that the council is going to be spending on the strategy for building communities of specialist provision for children. I think that's a really positive story as well. I know there is an element of cost increase with COVID, but it also shows that we've been able to secure extra investment to really ensure that our young people in Lincolnshire, have the best possible provision for their needs. So again, that I see that as being a positive story from a scrutiny point of view, that we're making that investment in our young people, and I'd like that to be minuted as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morn. I take it we have no further speakers. So I know that Councillor Bradwell wishes to come and make a comment. Councillor Bradwell?
Councillor Kendrick, did you want me to answer the insourcing?
Oh, indeed. I'm sorry. I was getting ahead of myself there.
Sorry. No,
by all means.
It's okay. So, really agree with you about the SIP for benchmarking. We're really proud of that, and proud of that despite being outstanding. Our costs are so low. In terms of the insourcing of home to school transport, the root and branch review will consider all options, and that that's something that we'll look at going forward. There's all kinds of complexity in it, but yes, just to reassure you, it's looking at every option that we possibly can to manage the increase in trajectories.
Thank you very much, Heather. Councillor Bradwell, did you wish to come in?
Well, only just to reiterate, I didn't realise Heather was coming back in, but have to say, the review that's taking place, obviously, it's sort of not within children's, it's children's, it's highways, and Nicole Hilton has been leading on it with these consultants called Edge, who have got some experience in looking at local authority services and that, and actually it is going quite well. It has been a bit torturous getting going. Well, for me, I suppose I'm impatient. And Heather has been the same. So, but we have got going. We had a meeting this last week where, we're challenging them back because they come back with something and we think, well, you don't really know how big Lincolnshire is. But hopefully from that, we will be able to come to you and go to my executive colleagues to see whether actually in Lincolnshire, is Lincolnshire sort of so big? I mean, and because we have very few, large bus operators. I mean, we've got Stagecoach, but that's really the only one. You go to North Yorkshire, there's lots of big operators there because you've got York as well and that. So, we are looking at all those things. So the report will, I think, it could come back and say, well, actually, what you're paying is right. It will probably come back and say do things a bit different. But we are looking at, as well as parents actually as paying parents mileage. We've never really gone down that route, but some people might be happy to take the children to school on their way to work. I don't know, but just wanted to say that we are taking this very seriously. And obviously I don't want to say put things to scrutiny, but it might be an idea with scrutiny when the report is finalised that you might have a special meeting, a one-off get-together to go through it, because actually it could be, there will be so much information, and I'm sure you'll be so interested in what's going. So it might be, just having a normal meeting, you might not be able to give it justice, Mr. Chairman. Might be something to think about. And just on the social care aspect, we are doing lots with these new homes, doing some new homes and that. And obviously, within the council, because we're so good at how we spend our money, Heather and I are under a lot of pressure because, your budget's going up. Why is it going up? But you're quite right, Alexander, to raise those figures, because actually what we do with our money, we produce so many good outcomes. Do you know what I mean? So it is nice to hear, my colleagues on this committee saying that, because, we do get hauled over the coals several times because actually, our budget's slightly going out of control. And, we have, because we've been in COVID, obviously we got good reason, but it's nice to hear comments from you saying, you're doing all right. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradwell. I think to summarise at the end of this discussion, I too am struck by the issue of the home to school transport. I recall when I was a member of this council about 20 years ago, it was £12 million a year. So when I looked at the figures, I thought, yeah, it certainly has changed a bit in that period. But I think the comments to go forward and for minuting, and I know Councillor Moore has mentioned them, the SIPFA issue, I think that's fantastic. That as Councillor Bradwell has said, we do so well with the money that we have, and the way we spend it is very well done. So the benchmarking, the home to school, we've already discussed that one, and obviously that be noted. And again, the investment in young people is to be welcomed. So thank you everyone for your contributions on that. Now, just to recap, the actions required by this committee are to consider the report, and members of the committee invited to make comments, which we have done, and these will be considered at the executive at its meeting on the 2nd of February. I therefore move that we support the budget proposals, and our comments are passed on to the executive for consideration at their February meeting. Can I ask if you all are in agreement? And if anyone dissents, can they indicate in the column now, please? I see no dissent in the chat column, so therefore that's been agreed, and thank you very much for that. Thank you. If we can now move on to item 6, which is the schools funding update for 2021 and 2022. This item is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services on the 20th of this month. And I would like to invite Mark Popplewell, Head of Finance, Children's Services, to present this report. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the purpose of this report is to seek the views and support of the committee of the local authorities' school funding, mainstream school funding formula proposals for 21-22 financial year. And as you say, it's subject to Councillor Bradwell's decision on the 20th of January, so next week. So the recommendation is to replicate the national funding formula, and obviously subject to affordability, and that aspect I'll pick up in my presentation today, and also the implementation of SEN-related financial changes as well. So no alternatives were proposed to the national funding formula. As a way of background, and I know Heather touched on it in parts, but in terms of the national funding formula implementation, which took place in 1819, so it was a government-led initiative, and it was about bringing consistency in funding for schools nationally, and also ensuring that fair settlement for each school. So the government introduced the formula in 2018-19. Local authorities were encouraged to implement that, and it was about moving on a sensible trajectory towards that end point in terms of every school being like the same funding arrangements, ensuring that fairer funding. So Lincolnshire has benefited significantly through this investment financially, and that has been positive. And Lincolnshire replicated that formula in 1819 and has subsequently replicated it in each year. And in 2021, it was the first year where all schools was on at least the national funding formula, following the ending of the caps because of the affordability aspects at a national level. So all schools in Lincolnshire are at least on that formula. So local authorities at the moment are in control and have the decision-making powers in terms of setting the local funding formula for our mainstream schools. So that's our maintained schools, and including there is no alternative to this, and one of the main reasons for that is actually the justification and how we would actually evidence and move away from that national funding formula, particularly when all schools in Lincolnshire are gaining. So it will be redirecting from one school to the other, hence why we're only putting one solution forward. But also in terms of local flexibilities, since its implementation, those local flexibilities have reduced significantly. And that is really the government's drive to sort of equalise overall funding. And also it may be that longer term aim of central government for all schools to be operated by central government rather than actually having that local flexibility. But that is something that will be subject to consultation, likely to be in this year. So then moving on to the next sections and going into a bit more detail. So this is the 21-22 is the second year of the Prime Minister's settlement, and overall 4.8 billion investment for 21-22. So that picks up the entire dedicated schools grant, not only the schools but also the high needs level of funding. In terms of illustrative funding, so this was based on financial modelling at that point in time. As we work through the process in terms of the publication of budgets, that will become more accurate. But in terms of illustrative funding, overall, Lincolnshire schools will be gaining by over 18 million. So that again, that is positive. And also added in within that is the mainstreaming of teachers' pay and pension grants. And that was something that schools were impacted by financially, and the government introduced separate grants outside the dedicated schools to support that. In 21-22, those will be mainstreamed within the dedicated school grants, therefore them separate grants will no longer be in place, and that provides some level of stability within that. So in terms of proposed Lincolnshire's funding formula for 21-22, as I've mentioned, it's a positive impact for schools. It is subject to affordability. And on page 35, you'll see the key points of the actual formula changes for 21-22. So there will be a minimum funding guarantee in place, and it will be a positive one. The key formula factors will be increasing by 3% in monetary value. There is the continuation of the minimum per pupil funding level, so no schools will go below those two levels specified as a primary and secondary level. The mainstream grants of teachers' pay and pension grants, they'll be included in the national funding formula, not only within the baseline, but also within the actual formula going forward. There is no ceiling cap, so this allows all schools to receive the entitlement of the national funding formula. And also a positive one for Lincolnshire schools is the additional funding going into small and remote and rural schools through the sparsity factor. So a £19,000 increase on that. So that's a real positive one. And I know there's going to be further work, central government work on that, and I'm sure the committee would be welcome to contribute on that. But hopefully that will be coming online in 21 going forward. So the local authority consulted on the continuation of replicating the national funding formula. One of the points about affordability is because of the lagged funding arrangement. So Lincolnshire, the local authorities receive funding based on October 2019, but schools funding is based on 2020, October 2020. And as you'll be aware, due to the pandemic, personal circumstances have changed within families. And actually what we've seen is quite a significant sharp increase in preschool meals eligibility. So over 25% of eligibility. And obviously that then creates a funding gap. And that funding gap is actually around £2 million. So that's, quite significant. And it's something that many local authorities, particularly in the East Midlands, have actually experienced as well. So this is not just solely relating to Lincolnshire. It's probably a national issue, but East Midlands have confirmed that to be the case. So as part of one of the questions, it did consider about affordability and asking schools' views on solutions in terms of addressing that. Clearly, we want to replicate it, but it has to be sustainable within that schools block. Also, there was two further questions on the proposal relating to SEND related funding arrangements. So this was about the targeted funding and notional SEN. The notional SEN is an amount that is determined within the national funding formula, and Lincolnshire is proposing to use that sum as a basis for determining whether a school has sufficient notional SEN. This is to support not only low-level, high-instant needs within pupils' needs in schools, but also the first £6,000 for a child with an education healthcare plan. And where there is insufficient funding, this is where the targeted funding criteria comes in and provides additional monies so those schools with a disproportionate number of pupils with complex needs, they're supported financially and obviously not financially disadvantaged as a result. So on those two options, it's about using the national funding formula, as we say, because there's been more monies going into schools, more notional SEN, so therefore it's right and proper that it's reflected in there. So these arrangements will ensure fairer funding for schools, but also the effective deployment of the high needs block within the dedicated schools grant, which is also important from a local authority perspective. Transition protection will be applied in 21-22, where actually financial changes, material financial changes do take place. But obviously that will be depending on the school impact, and that will be funded within the reserves of the dedicated schools grant. So we engaged in consultation exercise with the schools in December. And obviously at that point in time, we did provide illustrative impacts at a school level. So it was open and transparent, and they could actually see their overall funding impact. If I just draw you to, within the pack, we've got Appendix A, and I'll just explain what each of the sections do, but I won't go into the detail of that. I'll cover that in the main report. So Appendix A represents, it provides the detail in terms of the consultation exercise, so the background of funding and the processes, that pages 45 to 47. The detail of the national funding formula makeup and the key components of the formula, that's pages 48 and 49. The consultation questions themselves, the schools, the number of schools responding in terms of quantity and also by sector, and their comments, and also the local authorities' comments in terms of reflecting on what the school's views are, and then coming to a position, and then overall what the local authorities' proposal is in terms of 21-22. And also within pages 59 to 60, what that provides is a comparison between the funding for 2021 and versus the new financial year of 21-22. So you can do a direct comparison on that. So overall, 60 schools responded to the consultation, and it was an improved rate, although it is still quite a low percentage. And I think what schools do rely on is, I guess, the governance structure that we have in place here. Schools Forum was there yesterday, and that is a representative of the school sector, so head teachers and governors are part of that, and they went through this and was in support of the proposals, and also the governance structure in itself in this committee in reviewing it. So there's often that reliance from schools that the governance is there to protect them, and obviously from a local authority perspective, the objectivity and wanting to ensure all schools get the right deal is fundamental to the work we do. So in terms of the outcomes and the support rate, it ranged from 93 to 100% across the consultation, so really positive in terms of replicating that national funding formula, and indeed also altering the SEN funding arrangements to ensure it's reflective of the national funding formula. So then that provides that sort of continuity and objectivity, and obviously that transparency within that, and also the deployment of a fair funding arrangement. And also the ensuring that targeted funding approach continues, and it supports those schools that would otherwise be financially disadvantaged as a result. So moving on to the next section about drawing out what those key points are in terms of the actual changes for 21-22. And I guess discussing the affordability point, and that will be something that I'd be keen to seek your views on about those options. So from a school's perspective, and giving them the opportunity to comment on if affordability was an issue, what options would you take? And there is an affordability point, as I touched on, and local authority officers are currently working through those, and a briefing paper will be released before the decision is made, so you can actually see what changes we plan to make before Councillor Bradwell makes that final decision. But we're working on minimising the financial impact, and we'll do everything we can to reduce the impact on the quantity of schools and obviously the financial impact on those schools. So from a school's perspective, 35% of the respondents want to change to the minimum funding guarantee. So at the moment, it's planned as a plus 2%, so all schools on a per pupil level will increase by 2%. But the central government do allow that to reduce to a maximum of plus 0.5%. So it does give a range there, and 35% of the schools supported that. One of the to explain that the importance of this one is that those schools in receipt of minimum funding guarantee are actually funded above the national funding formula at the moment. So they're in excess of the government's formula. And the reason for that is due to historic funding arrangements that have been locked into their baselines. So actually reducing it from 2% to plus 0.5, it will actually reduce that gap overall. And at some point, these schools will need to move on to the national funding formula. But obviously, at the moment, the government have set it at a positive increase, as opposed to in the past where it used to be a negative sum. So actually, it will provide in the longer term equity and fairness in the overall funding. 33% of the respondents put forward a ceiling cap. So this was about reducing the gains on schools. But obviously, that will then provide challenges to those schools that are actually gaining funding, and obviously it will be a reduced level of overall funding, and that may be a reason why they, in terms of free school meals and such like, why they've had increases. Therefore, that will be something we would look to try and avoid, if at all possible. But if the minimum funding guarantee didn't allow us or didn't provide enough monies to support that gap, that unfortunately would be the next alternative. But that was hopefully just to give you a bit of background in terms of potentially those options. But we want to try and do our best to actually replicate that national funding formula and have a fair deal for schools. So on pages 37, you can see the key changes within that, which I've referred to earlier, as well as the SEN-related arrangements of nodal SEN and targeted funding, and providing that transition arrangements. In terms of the impact at an overall school level, this was based on the October 2019 census data. Primary schools overall would see gains of 4.3% or 34,000, and secondary schools would receive overall gains of 2.7% or 110,000. But clearly, the October 20 census will actually provide the actual final position on there. You can see there in tables 2 and 3 the impact at a financial level as well, just to provide some further detail on that. So in terms of next steps, the local authority officers will be reviewing the affordability aspect, and a briefing paper will be released before the decision to explain what steps we're taking, but obviously the desire to replicate the national formula as best we can. And then after that, once the decision is made, we will be then producing a report, which will then go to the Education Funding Agency to validate for regulation compliance. And then we're then publishing the school budgets the 28th February 21. So overall, I say seeking your views and comments, and the conclusion section summarises the overall position and what we've put forward. But I'll be happy to take questions. But yes, really seeking your views on, particularly on that affordability point, and other general comments. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for a comprehensive report there. I'd now like to invite members of the committee to comment on this report. Councillor Morn, do we have any speakers at the moment?
Chairman, we don't have any speakers at the minute, but I've got a couple of comments to make, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead, please.
Thank you for the detailed report, Mark, and it's good to see that the direction of travel in Lincolnshire is a positive one, and that gap is closing. And I think really from reading the report and the technical guidance you've given, we don't really have an option other than to accept the national funding formula as the way forward. And as time goes on, as you say, we will meet that equitable situation going forwards. And obviously, slightly disappointingly, we do still remain below the England average. And that's something that I hope colleagues will and officers will continue to challenge Whitehall and civil servants on that. But I think as far as this report goes, I think it's positive. It's a step in the right direction, and I think sensibly we've got to follow that national funding formula. So I'm happy to support the recommendations, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morn. I take it we have no further questions or comments. If the thing I take away from this report is some key words which kept coming up, which I think give the flavour to the report. Positive impact, I think, was an oft-repeated remark, which is very encouraging, and equity as well. Although, again, just to echo the comments of Councillor Moore on this, with so many aspects of our council funding in our part of the country, the sort of disparity between ourselves and some of the big metropolitan areas, this historic issue of underfunding, as it were. So I would certainly support, and I think colleagues would support lobbying as we can. And I know it goes on, but you know, it's something which we're very aware of, is the bringing ourselves up to a higher level. So if there's no further comments, the only other comment was the consultation response rate. I noticed. Has it gone up slightly, Mark, or is it about on a par with previous times?
It has actually gone up, Chair. So yes, there has been an increased representation. And also we did attend all the virtual head teacher briefings as well in the autumn to them, explaining the impact of schools as well and the direction of travel. So hopefully all the schools were informed and will be planning for this as well, and obviously providing the illustrative funding impact, albeit it was based on a year old data, but they'll be understanding and hopefully planning for those funding impacts. But yes, it is positive, and I know Lincolnshire has gained through this. We were in the lower quartile, so we are actually moving up the ranks there, as the table shows, and it is based on those pupil characteristics. But the sparsity element, I think, and the rural school element, I think that's still an area of review from central government. But I think if we're able to contribute to that, hopefully then we can get an even better deal for our small rural schools.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. If we have no further comments, and just to summarise, this committee is invited to consider the report in Appendix 1 and determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Adult Care, Health and Children's Services as set out in the report. And secondly, to agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive Council in relation to this item. And we have had a number of comments on that. The three recommendations to the Executive Council are set out on pages 31 and 32 of the agenda. The comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, to be passed on to the Executive Councillor. I therefore move that we support the recommendations to the Executive Councillor as set out on pages 31 and 32 of the agenda, and agree to pass on our comments to the Executive Councillor. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Was that Councillor Morn?
It was, yeah, it's me.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morn. That's great. We now have to vote on the item, and you are voting on whether you support the recommendations to the Executive Councillor and agree to provide the additional comments to the Executive Councillor. So, as this is an education matter, I believe we have some added members present. The added members will be entitled to vote on this item. So we now move over to Trina, who will read out the name of each member present alphabetically, and you're asked to state for, against, or abstain. Over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'll start with yourself, Councillor Rob Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Alexander Morn.
For.
Councillor Matt Bowles.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Wendy Bokit.
For.
Councillor Matthew Fido.
Sorry, I've got.
For.
Councillor Rob Fuchs.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Judy Kelly. I don't know if she's there or not still. Councillor Colin Matthews.
For.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
For.
Councillor Linda Wotton.
For.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
For.
Mrs. Megan Matchin.
For.
Ms. Alex Sayer.
For.
I just go back to Councillor Mrs. Judy Kelly. Are you there at all?
She was present earlier, Trina.
Yeah, I did notice she came in sort of at 10:47. We've got a welcome. Okay.
She's on her phone. She's not actually on the Teams call. She's actually joined via the phone. So it depends whether she can respond or not, maybe.
Right. Okay, then. So from those that have voted, Chairman, it's carried.
Thank you very much. As I say, those recommendations are carried. Thank you very much. We now move on to our agenda item 7, which is Children Missing Out on Education Annual Report 2019-20. Now, this item provides the committee with an update on children missing out on education in 2019-20. And I would like to invite Jill Chandonere, Inclusion and Attendance Manager, to introduce this report. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you, Councillor, and good morning, everybody. The report, Children Missing Out on Education, provides you with some numbers and some analysis on groups of children that are not in school and therefore missing education or at risk of missing education. The report covers 2019-20 academic year, during which COVID closed schools from March to September. Therefore, the data is quite different this year, and in some way quite challenging to analyse and predict future trends. But I just want to touch on a few key points, then hopefully you have some questions after if you want to know any further information. So children missing education, those are the children that are not on a school roll or being educated otherwise. I just wanted to reassure the committee that we do have an effective system for schools to let us know when a child is no longer attending their school or in their area at the address that they believe them to be. And schools are very good at doing that. They're also in the majority compliant in letting us know about when a child arrives at a school and when a child leaves a school, so that we don't have any gaps there and we're not going to be missing children in that way. And if they don't know the destination school of these children, that they report them as children missing education. So we're quite confident that we're capturing those children that are not in school in that way. During the lockdown in March onwards, we did see a drop in the reporting children missing education, which is not surprising because ending school is not compulsory. And they were obviously having difficulty contacting some families and establishing where they were and so on. That has been rectified in September when school became compulsory. There was a lot of work done by schools and letting us know, and by the team in going out and seeing if we can locate these children or establish that they're actually in another school somewhere else. Our experiences on children missing education are very similar to other authorities. Not necessarily the numbers, because different authorities record children missing education in different ways, but we are having similar experiences in that way across the country. Elective home education, I brought papers to committee before, but this is around 2019-20. So despite the lockdown between March and June, principally, the numbers of elective home education children rose for that year, and providing an education is in place. We don't really have any concerns over that. The significant rise is going to be evident in the 2020-21 report. But as for that year, there was a rise, but nothing like we've currently seen. So when the process was running normally, if I can use that word, the education of those children at home was generally satisfactory and had improved. I think because we've introduced a new system at the beginning of the elective home education process, which quite quickly identifies where a family is able to educate their child at home and will be. So if you take out those children and get them back into school, we're left with those parents who are dedicated to educating their children at home. From March onwards, I think we're still seeing the impact of lockdown, because the contact with parents reduced, the responses from these parents reduced as well. And therefore our confidence in that education at home is perhaps not as where as it was at the beginning of that academic year. But we are continuing with the process and checking these families and putting in any socially distant visits that we need to do on the doorstep to establish that those children actually are still there. The other area I just wanted to mention was the fixed penalty notices and the prosecutions. These are processes that schools use to address non-attendance in school. And from September 19 to March 20, prior to the lockdown, schools were using this, similarly in rates to the previous year. Obviously, in March, lockdown meant that all these processes stopped. So hence, that's why you'll see no data for then on. When education became compulsory again in September, schools could use these strategies to address attendance. This varied by school to school, and we did see some fixed penalty coming in from September 2020, mainly for unauthorised holidays. However, we're now in a situation where those processes have stopped again and will restart when schools go back. And then finally, just touching on reduced timetables, we produced a new guidance to schools to ensure that we were aware of children that are not getting a full education and they're on a reduced timetable. So schools are very clear of their expectations and letting us know, and they have been very good at this. And prior to, again, the lockdown in March, they were using this system effectively, and we were able to see which children were on longer periods of reduced timetable and in principle, the appropriateness of that. We are predicting that quite high for 2021 as schools are using reduced timetables as a strategy to reintegrate children back into school, particularly if they've been anxious on their return. That's just some of the areas, and I now are open to any questions anyone has on the rest of the report.
Thank you very much, Jill. Appreciate that. I'd now like to invite members of the committee to speak to the report. Councillor Morn, do we have any speakers?
Yes, we do, Chairman. We've got Councillor Ray Wootton and Councillor Mark Whittington.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whittington, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my question really, Jill, and thanks for a very good report, as usual. Because I had a piece of casework earlier on last year, and the issue seemed to be that there'd been a fundamental sort of breakdown in the relationship between the child's parents and the school regarding something that happened at the school, and then a similar sort of lack of trust in the governing body of the school to determine the to determine the issue. I mean, what and obviously the child is then sort of regarded as missing education. What can we do to facilitate that particular process? Where for whatever reason, the fundamental sort of relationship between the parents and the school have broken down, especially if the parents feel that the governing body will naturally take the side of the school. And I don't think there's any sort of independent appeals process. What can we do? Because obviously schools that, like in this case, are academy schools, we have a lot, less control over than we used to. What can we do to facilitate that, or if necessary, helping the parents to find an alternative school placement for their child? Thanks.
The child, yeah. So I think what you're explaining is a breakdown of communication between the parent and the school, which meant the child is not attending. I'm not clear in this case whether the child was completely off roll. I would suggest that the child is still on roll and it's actually a non-attendance rather than a child missing education, but obviously I don't know the case. The schools, particularly the academies, we speak to them all the time and support them in strategies that they can use to re-engage parents where that trust has broken down. We wouldn't necessarily put anything in place, but we do provide lots of advice and guidance, and that we have an offer to schools which they can buy into to support that. if you're describing that there's a complete breakdown, there's probably a high possibility that we would at least engage with the parent if the school felt that was useful. But it really is a case between the school and the parent, and we would just support the school to get the children back into school. A reconsideration of another school place, again, that would be the parental choice, and certainly not one that the school would promote in any way. So I'm not sure I've answered your question, but I'm hoping I've sort of reassured you that the school can get some support from us to address this. The parent, it is more difficult because we're not there in this case for parents, but we would work through the school to make sure that those parents get that support.
Yeah, I think. Thanks, Jill. Ultimately, I try to mediate between the school and the parent. Ultimately, and I did raise it with the Children Missing Education team. But ultimately, my advice to that particular parent was, well, if you believe that the relationship between you and the school has broken down to such an extent where you're not happy for your child to go anymore, the only option I can suggest to you is that you seek an alternative school placement. And really, that then has to be a matter, as I told the parents, that really has to be a matter for you. Unfortunately, they didn't subsequently contact me again, so all I can assume is that they took that particular advice. But for me, obviously, and I guess for yourselves, the best option would be if the relationship between the school and the parents could be re-established in some way. You know what I mean? To enable them to go back to start attending, the school where they're actually on the roll.
Yeah.
I think in this case, it was just a case. Ultimately, my advice was, but if you really do think that things have completely broken down, the only alternative I could suggest is that you do approach a new school.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. We try and keep them on the role of the school, because they may just turn up in another school and the issues that they had may reappear with another school. I'm not saying that's to do with the parents. That just might be that their needs of the child is not being met. So it is for the school to ensure they access all the services that are out there to support a child coming back to school, using early help assessment, using ensuring that the assessment of need is done. We would definitely challenge a school who wouldn't be taking that approach. But in general, schools have used all the tricks in the book really to ensure that attendance. And sometimes they go down the fixed penalty route and the prosecution route as a last resort and not as a first option.
I think, Jill, I think that is a very, very important point, to encourage schools to use the fixed penalty notice, as you said, as the last resort, and to try and do everything they possibly can to resolve the relationship with the parents and try to restore trust. Thanks, Jill. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine Whittington. I believe Councillor Ray Wootton wanted to ask a question. Councillor Wootton?
Yes, thank you very much, Steve, Mr. Chairman. Jill, can I refer you to page 88? It's back again to the fixed penalty notices. Why is there such a vast increase in people that seem to take their children on holiday and risk their education and get fined and think, well, it's cheaper to go on holiday than get fined?
Are you asking why do parents do this?
Yeah, is it because the fine is not enough deterrent to stop them from going on holiday, or is it the fact that school holidays are in the wrong place?
I think you probably have to ask the government that one, but I think we asked the question ourselves, actually. Why would parents risk the education of their children to take them on holiday? But, you know, it's probably not for me to understand every circumstance of every parent, and parents, you know, will make those choices. We do everything we can to tell schools, via schools, to tell parents the importance of being at school every day. However, it does, as you pointed out, it does seem to be a growing trend. There is the fixed penalty notice, and if that's not paid, we now take that forward to the single justice process, where there will be a fine, and there's likely that fine is going to be higher. Whether that is enough to deter parents taking their children on holiday, I don't know. I think we've had this conversation a long time around moving holidays and talking to travel companies and so on, but I think that's just something we'll have to continue to pursue.
I mean, the number of fines on your chart here, they've jumped in the past 3 years, tripled nearly, from 500 to 2,700. It's a big increase, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's possibly that these parents were taking their children on holiday before, but now the schools have decided to do something about it. That's probably why you're seeing the increase in the figures. I don't know if it's necessarily just that there's an increase in number of families taking their children, but it's probably a combination of both.
And the other question I wanted to ask you about non-attendance. How do we engage with the traveller community to make sure that their children are attending local schools?
Absolutely, yeah. We've got a service that supports the traveller children, and we have a charity that supports children that are elective home educated. So certainly if you're talking about during around the lockdown period, we have, certainly prioritise and talk to the communities and encourage them back into school. So yeah, there's definitely the resource there to support them into schools.
So is that a problem at all with the traveller community, or are they really more encouraging their children to go to school in this modern age?
I think they are, because they realise that to do things like take a driving test or own a business and so on, you have to have an education. It's a slow process, but we are seeing more. The lockdown, the pandemic hasn't helped, because they are an anxious community, and they've kind of locked themselves away. So we've taken a few steps back, but I'm sure once we resolve this for everybody, we can sort of move forward in the direction that we were going and getting them into schools.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Wooden. Heather, did you want to come in on that question or not?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of reassure Councillor Wooden, because I think you're absolutely right to point out the escalating number of fines, and Jill's absolutely right. The position in schools has changed over the last 5 years around whether schools authorise that absence, in which case they wouldn't be seen on here, or they don't. But the other thing to just remind the committee is that we have 108,000 school-age children in Lincolnshire. So that's representing something like 0.01% of children, just again to reassure you, we're a big county with lots of children. So whilst the figures are something we need to keep an eye on, just to assure Councillor Wooden, the vast majority of families don't take holiday in school time.
Chairman, if I could come back on to Heather, then there must be some reason that families seem to think they can get away with going on holiday and miss school. There must be some trend there and reason why.
Well, I think you alluded to it. I think for some families, the differential in a holiday in term time and a holiday in the summer, if they've got 3 children, even though the fine's bigger because they've got more children, it still means they can afford a holiday abroad potentially, whereas they might not be able to in the summer time. And for some families, their assessment would be that it was worth the fine, and we have to keep hammering home the value of every day in education. I think you're absolutely right.
Thanks for explaining, Heather. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Moore, do we have any other speakers?
Yes, we do, Chairman. Councillor Boquet would like to speak.
Over to you, Councillor Boquet.
Thank you. It was just back to Mark's question. and in support of Jill. In Wainfleet, we had, I think it's about 18 months ago, we had a 10-year-old who was not only not attending school, he was getting into with an older gang and getting into lots of trouble. It's an academy school here, and it was only with the fact that working with County Council, social workers together and the police, that we actually got him back into school. And it's unbelievable now. He wouldn't live with his parents. He was living with his nan. He's now back with his parents. He's back in school, and he's attending regularly. And it was only with the help of the County Council that we got there. Just to support that, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Any further speakers? I think. Sorry.
Councillor Bowles would like to speak.
Marvellous. Thank you. Councillor Bowles, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to go back to Councillor Wotton's point around children being taken out of school for holidays and etc. And I think particularly the main reason for parents is quite simply the cost of holidays. If you want to take your child abroad for a holiday, you're probably looking at the cost doubling. Between in a matter of days. If you went on holiday on the Friday, the last day of term, versus going on the Monday, the first day of the holidays, you are potentially looking at double the price of the holidays. I'm guilty of it. I've taken my daughter out of school on the Friday of the last day of term to get a cheaper holiday. And to be brutally honest, as a family, we will continue to do that because the benefits of for me of your children enjoying those kind of experiences are there to be valued as well. But there are also other factors at play, particularly in Gainsborough. We have a situation where obviously a lot of our secondary age school children go out of town and out of county to do school, and through that you encounter issues with crossover in holiday dates. So if you've got a child in secondary school and a child in primary school, potentially the only opportunity for you to have a joint holiday as a family is for one of them children to be taken out of school, because the term dates don't marry up across county, whether it be in Nottinghamshire and Lincolnshire and stuff like that. So there are other factors at play as well in local areas, particularly in Gainsborough. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to come back on that one? No. Councillor Moore, do we have any other speakers?
No, Chairman, no other speakers.
Thank you. Can I just ask one question, Jill? That I was interested in your remark about, if I remember correctly, you said that different authorities record data in different ways. I'm quite surprised about that. I would have thought the DfE would have issued some edict saying everybody has to record data in a particular manner.
Yeah, and I think we're striving to get that, but I think some authorities, we record every child that's not in education and for example and keep them as that until we're absolutely sure they're in a school. And I'm not saying other authorities don't do that, but they may have a different category for children they know about that are not in a school compared to children they don't know about and know about. So the numbers can look quite different. So some authorities break down children missing education into different categories and some keep it as a whole. That's what I mean. It is quite difficult to compare. We move elective home educated children whose education is unsuitable onto our children missing education because we believe they're no longer getting an education. Other authorities may keep them within elective home education. So that's the difference. Yes, it would be. I think we'll strive towards. I work with other authorities as well as getting some data that we could compare.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Ray wants to come back very briefly, Councillor Wotton, because we are on time, tight time. Councillor Wotton, did you say you wish to speak again?
Yes, sorry, Chairman, I couldn't hear you. You were muted a bit there.
Oh.
Just going back to the fines again. I'm sorry to I've got a question on it, but do you know how much the fines are for taking a child out of school unauthorised? And do we have repeat offenders? People that say, "Well, hang on, it's much cheaper to pay the fine and then I'll keep taking my child out of school each year.
Yeah, the cost of the fine, it's £60 and then 120 if it's not paid within 21 days, and it's per parent per child. So if you have 3 children in the house, each parent gets fined for those 3 parents. So that's when it starts to build up. Repeat offenders, yes, we do, a school would have to decide whether that builds up into something more, into how often they keep using a fixed penalty notice to address this, and when this becomes a kind of persistent absent case and they want to take it into a prosecution. And
do we have the money to fines ourselves?
The local authority really see the fines, yeah.
Right, okay, all right. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wotton. Councillor Moore, do we have any further speakers?
Yes, Chairman, we do. I just wanted to make a brief comment, and then we've got Councillor Fido who'd like to speak. I think the comment I wanted to make really is just that I think we've got to bear in mind as a committee that over the last year that we are looking at, COVID has had an impact on people and whether they feel that school is safe for their children. Lots of mixed messages from the government in particular. So I think we do have to look at it through that lens and be careful perhaps, because there are some people that for legitimate reasons may wish to keep their children at home and have them home educated in light of the pandemic, and also in normal times as well. So I just wanted to, to make that comment, so that's minuted as well, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, home education is a legitimate thing, as you say. And we have Councillor Fido, which I'm afraid will have to be the last speaker because I'm very conscious of time at the moment. So over to you, Councillor Fido.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Moore. I'll try and sort of keep it brief, but just like listening, I grew up in a multi-child household myself, and you alluded to 3 children. I was the eldest of 3 myself, and you say about having fixed penalty notices, which are then be in turn per child. In the same way, you have car parking ticket fixed notices. I've genuinely heard people who are more well off just effectively go, oh, it cost me 60 quid just to park right next to my office, because if they can afford to pay it, they will pay it. And it effectively bars people from less well off backgrounds from having that privilege, shall we say, and I use inverted commas there, of taking their children on holiday. It almost creates a 2-tier system, and it's just I don't know what remit there is to have maybe like a means tested fixed penalty notices in the same way that you have sort of like a sliding scale on income tax. If you have the ability to pay more, you pay more, because then, like I say, you end up with that 2-tier system of the haves and the have-nots. And leading on from that, an article I was reading this morning, actually, not that we've got any remit over this, but what if you just got rid of the 6-week bank holidays, 6-week school holidays, and just had school all year round, have that holiday time redistributed throughout the year, and have each region of the UK on a sliding sort of holiday scale. So then, the holiday companies couldn't just fleece parents when they know they can for those 6 weeks, families like Councillor Bowles, for example, or my own family when I grew up.
Thank you, Councillor Fido. I think, as you said, these actually are things way out of the remit of our committee or indeed the council. But I see what you're saying.
But the two-tier system of the haves and the have-nots is, I think, more what we have the ability to discuss. Yeah. It means testing of fixed penalty notices.
Jill, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, you're right. I can't necessarily answer some of those questions, but I just wanted to reassure the committee that, during these difficult times, fixed penalty notices have not been on the minds of schools. It's not something they want to do to get families back into school. First, issuing a fixed penalty notice is entirely the discretion of the head teacher. It's not one that a local authority insists on. We're very dependent on the school using that. And I am aware that schools have been using every strategy they can to get to not use a fixed penalty notice. and even when it comes to holiday, to making those decisions as to whether that holiday is justified or not. So it is a very different time at the moment, but I didn't want to think that people that is sort of top of the agenda and getting children back into school and the strategies used. It's not. It's a much more empathetic and supportive strategies that are being used. But I certainly take on board what Councillor I was saying in terms of different ways of looking at things, but it is government-led, unfortunately.
Thank you very much for that, Bill. I'm afraid that's all the speakers we can have on this particular item. The actions required of the committee are to review and comment on the Children Missing Out on Education Report 2019-20, and I therefore move that we receive the report and endorse the Children Missing Out on Education Annual Report 2019-20. Can I ask if you're all in agreement? And if anyone is dissenting, please could you indicate in the chat column now, please? There's no dissent indicated, so I take it that all those actions are agreed. So thank you very much for that item. We now move on to item 8, which is the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee work programme. And item sets out the committee's work programme for 2020 and 21. And I'd like to invite Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, to present the report. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Your next meeting is on the 5th of March. We have an update from the Lincolnshire Safeguarding Children Partnership from Chris Cook and Stacey Waller. We also have a pre-decision report on the future of the boarding provision at the St Francis Special School, Lincoln. That's the final decision for that, for decision between the 8th and 12th of March. We'll also be receiving the Q3 performance report, and we're also due to receive the Lincolnshire Local Authority school performance for 2019-20. Obviously, members will be aware the exams last year were cancelled. So this will be more of a update in terms of the sort of staff assessment, the assessments that were done for that, and probably will cover into this year as well in terms of how that's changing. So that'll be probably slightly different this year to what you normally receive. And also there's a briefing paper that'll be sent by email on the transition scrutiny review recommendations and how they're progressing. Otherwise, that's it, Chairman. I have no amendments to make to the work programme. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Councillor Moore, do we have any members wishing to speak to this item?
No, we don't, Chair, but I would just like to make the comment, following Councillor Bradwell's comment earlier this morning about the homeschool transport review. I know it won't necessarily come to a full scrutiny meeting, but can we just be mindful that we'd like to organise either a whole committee or a small committee of people to look into that?
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Yes, I think a briefing session or something similar was, I think, mooted by Councillor Bradwell. And I think, yes, if we could have a look into that, Tracy, I think in due course that'd be a good thing to do. Thank you very much.
Yeah, certainly. I'll work with Head and Councillor Bradwell. When it's ready to come forward, then we'll book something in for you.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Thank you. Well, the committee was asked to review and agree that the work programme as set out in the report, and to highlight, discuss any additional scrutiny activity which could be considered for inclusion in the programme. I think we've done that. Can I ask that the proposed actions are approved? Please indicate again if you disagree in the chat column. I'm taking it, no dissent there, so that's the work programme agreed. Thank you very much for that. We now move to consideration of exempt information. Items 9, 10 and 11 on the agenda contain exempt information, and we will now need to vote on whether we go into private session. I therefore propose the following motion: that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following two items of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act. Do I have a seconder?
Chairman, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you very much. We will now vote on this motion. You are voting on whether you support the motion to exclude the press and the public for the remainder of the meeting. Trina will read out the name of each member, again alphabetically, and you're asked to state for, against, or abstain. So it's over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. Starting with yourself, Councillor Rob Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Alexander Morn.
For.
Councillor Matt Bowles.
For.
Councillor Mrs Wendy Bokett.
For.
Councillor Matthew Fido.
For.
Councillor Rob Fuchs.
For.
I don't think Councillor Kelly, is Councillor Kelly still by phone, do we know? I presume she is, yeah. Councillor Colin Matthews.
For.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
For.
Councillor Linda Wotton.
For.
Councillor Ray Wotton.
For.
Mrs Megan Matchin.
For.
I understand Miss Alex Sayers left the meeting, is that correct?
Yes.
So that's carried then, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That's agreed. We will now adjourn for 5 minutes. So make it 11:40. So we'll adjourn for 5 minutes while we wait for confirmation that the public link has been terminated and to allow time for a comfort break. Please ensure that your microphone and camera are both switched off. Members